Good evening and welcome to the third and final program in the National Council of Jewish Women Michigan series, The Power of Your Vote. I am Marilyn Mossman. Co-chair Lynn Lieberman and I are delighted to welcome our panelists and you, the viewers, to tonight's program, post, election reflections, implications for the future. The panelists will share their thoughts on the November general election and their viewpoints on possible implications. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Attendees, you'll notice your mics are muted and your video does not show. This is to prevent background noise. You should be able to hear and see the presenters. We apologize if you are having technical difficulties. We are unable to assist with troubleshooting. The webinar is being recorded and will be available after the forum on our website at ncjwmi.org/election-2020. Please put your questions in the Q&A and specify if you are addressing the question to a particular person. We will ask as many questions as we can after the presentations have finished. At this time, I'd like to introduce Amy Cutler, President of National Council of Jewish Women, Michigan. Amy?
Hello, good evening. Welcome to the last program in our three-part series, The Power of Your Vote. I am so excited that you are joining our webinar tonight. We hope that you find this webinar very informative. NCJW Michigan is a local section of the National Council of Jewish Women. It is a grassroots organization of volunteers and advocates striving for social justice by improving the quality of life for women, children, and families, and by safeguarding individual rights and freedoms. To learn more about the many programs and projects in which we are involved, please visit our website at www.ncjwmi.org. National Council of Jewish Women Michigan is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and as such does not endorse candidates or political parties. It does not advocate for or against any candidate or political party. We may, however, take positions on issues and federal judicial nominations. The positions expressed by today's speakers are their opinions and do not represent the views of NCJW. The 2020 election has ended. The votes have been counted and some votes have been recounted. We saw the largest turnout ever for both Democrats and Republicans. A record number of Michigan voters voted by absentee ballot this time. Tonight, we are fortunate to have two Michigan editorial page editors discuss the election and its implications. It is my pleasure to welcome tonight's moderator, Stephen Steinhardt. Steve has practiced law for close to 27 years, including nearly 20 years as an assistant prosecuting attorney. He has produced or co-produced several historical mock trials where the audience jury is then asked to render its verdict on topics including, was Harry Truman justified to drop the atomic bombs on Japan, the Kennedy assassination, and should the Electoral College be abolished? He also has served as a grader for the Advanced Placement U.S. History Test for the past 3 years. Steve recently received the 2020 Special Service Award from the Macomb Bar Association for organizing a Christmas Eve dinner provided by local attorneys for those in need. Steve, it is my pleasure to turn the mic over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the National Council of Jewish Women, Michigan, and I'm excited to hear from our distinguished guests tonight. Our panelists are Brian Dickerson, the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, and Nolan Finley, editorial page editor of the Detroit News. Let me start with Mr. Dickerson. He is the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press and a frequent contributor to the USA Today network. He joined the Free Press as the newspaper's Sunday magazine editor in 1988, and he was the president of the National Sunday Magazine Editors Association. Over more than 3 decades as a columnist, he has written extensively on national and state politics, the judiciary, and law enforcement. and just about anything else that captures the attention of Michigan readers. Brian Dickerson has been also listed as a noteworthy columnist by Marquise Who's Who. Mr. Dickerson previously worked at the Miami Herald and the Wall Street Journal. He is a graduate of Princeton University, where his residential advisor happened to be the next door neighbor happened to be the future Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And also, we have Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News. And that's a position he's held since May 1st of 2000. He directs the expression of the newspaper's editorial position on various national and local issues, and he writes a column in the Sunday newspaper. Prior to that, Finley was the newspaper's deputy managing editor, directing the newsroom, and he served as business editor and in various editing positions on city, state, and the Metro desk. He was also a reporter covering Detroit City Hall during the Coleman Young administration. He's been with the newspaper since 1976, starting as a copy boy in the newsroom while a student at Wayne State University. Mr. Finley is a graduate of both Schoolcraft College in Livonia and Wayne State, where he earned a bachelor's degree in journalism. In 2012, he was inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. Thank you, both of you, for joining us tonight, and thank you all the viewers as well.
Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. As a reminder to our viewers, please put your questions in the Q&A. If the question is to be addressed to a specific panelist, please indicate to whom when asking your question. So we are going to start right now with opening arguments, opening comments. And Mr. Finley, let's begin with you. Could you please summarize some of your reflections on the election?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Happy to. I think, my view, the process was the way it was supposed to. We had an election. People spoke. They spoke in large numbers, record turnouts across the nation. Joe Biden won the election, won the popular vote, won the electoral vote, and that doesn't always happen. It's last time around. And so, we have changed presidents, as we have over and over again through our history. We've changed presidents, we've changed control, and although there is still some angst about it, there was angst last time. Some people who haven't accepted reality, true last time around too, to a lesser degree. This is going to pass. The Electoral College voters will cast their, in Michigan and elsewhere, will cast their votes on December 12th, and we'll be on our way to Inauguration Day on January 20th with a new administration, and we will see how that works out for the country. It's the beauty of the American system is that people have not just the right, but the absolute ability to change the direction of the country at the ballot box. And we've done it once again.
Thank you. And now let's move to Mr. Dickerson. Brian, what are your reflections on the election?
I guess my biggest takeaway was how little, after all the trauma and angst of the last 4 years, how little the political dynamics of Michigan had changed in the preceding 4 years. We had essentially the same division. More people voted for Joe Biden than voted for Hillary Clinton, but more people voted for Donald Trump in 2020 than voted for him in 2016. Until this year, one of the conventional rules of understanding Michigan politics was high turnout elections favor Democrats and low turnout elections favor Republicans. And if you look back at what we consider the wave elections, Obama in 2008 and 2012, Republican congressional candidates in 2010, Republicans in 2014, and of course, the 2016 presidential election. That seemed to be the case. And then Democrats came roaring back in unprecedented numbers in 2018. That was a genuine wave election, a blue wave. And then we come to 2020, and what we have are essentially a blue wave and a red wave crashing together with very little resolution and much of the landscape pretty much the same after it's over. Yes, turnout was up all over, but it was up especially in counties that Donald Trump and John James won. In Macomb County, in Ottawa County, the increase in turnout was much greater than in Wayne and Oakland and Washtenaw. And Detroit was especially interesting to me. Turnout did not hardly budged in Detroit. It was up about 1% from 2016. And Joe Biden got pretty much the same number of votes that Hillary Clinton got. And Donald Trump got significantly more votes in Detroit than he got in 2016. And after all the spending and the advertising saturation, John James won only about 100 more votes in Detroit than Donald Trump did. So that got my attention. The last thing I want to mention sort of echoes what Nolan said. For all the talk about a chaotic election and how long it was unresolved, I thought the stunning thing was how smoothly an election conducted in all kinds of unprecedented circumstances. The pandemic, of course, the enormous increase in absentee voting, how smoothly that all went. And I was very relieved, I guess, by all the bad things that didn't happen.
Thank you for your opening comments to each of you. We're ambitiously attempting to cover 5 topics: protecting the democratic process, U.S. position in the world and foreign affairs, the economy and COVID, the role of the media, and then the implications of elections for Michigan. Also, we're going to save time at the end for as many questions and answers as we can from the audience. For each topic, there'll be a number of smaller sections. My law professors would call this a series of compound questions. So to any of my lawyer friends out there, we're going to ask a few of these questions at a time and then rotate back and forth with Nolan and Brian so they can make those commentaries. So our first topic, protecting the democratic process, part A. And we'll start with Brian and then Nolan, if you can comment after. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, what are the implications of the election for the state of our democracy? Is the democratic process at risk? What effects, if any, do unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud and rigged elections have on the integrity of the election process and its results? What impact might such claims have on public confidence and trust in our democratic institutions? So let's go with Brian first. And if you want me to go back and repeat part or all that question, just let me know.
Now, I think if you look at where we are right now, there is a lot of reason to be concerned and a little scared about voter confidence in the process. The polling numbers I've seen lately suggest that as much as 3/4 of the people who voted for Donald Trump don't believe that Joe Biden legitimately won the election. I suspect that's not going to be sustained as we move away, as the Electoral College does its thing. I do think, having a lot of institutional voices say over and over and over that the election was rigged, that dead people voted, that ballots were manipulated via computer and in foreign countries over and over, has had a deleterious impact. And I am very concerned about that.
Thank you. And Nolan, would you want to comment on that same question? And if
Yeah.
you want me to repeat any part of that?
No, I'm good. You know, I think, again, as I said, the process worked. And does it hurt confidence when people won't accept the results of election and gin up conspiracy theories? Absolutely, it does. We saw that 4 years ago with this false Russian collusion narrative and all these folks saying Donald Trump didn't really win and put him in office. That was no more healthy for election than what's going on now. And yet in 2018, people voted in a midterm in record numbers. People turned out and voted in record numbers across all demographic groups. So if they've lost confidence in the voting process or in the electoral, not dissuading them from participating. And that's what you're concerned at. Would it be better? Yes, if both Democrats and Republicans would learn to accept the vote and pull together. There's no point in what's going on now in trying to conspiracy theory for why Donald Trump lost. It's not going to change the election. It just increases the bitterness of our division. But that was true last time around as well. I think in this election, we dealt with a whole new system that people had to adjust to in a hurry. This massive mail-in vote. That's bound to raise some concerns. It's bound to lead to some problems and some glitches. I don't believe there was widespread fraud in this election, but we know there was some fraud because people have already been arrested, charged with fraudulent behavior. But each one of those should be investigated and prosecuted so that we know how to safeguard the system. We're going to have another election 2 years. And so what can we learn from what went wrong this time? I don't think we should be afraid to ask that question. I was concerned about a few things with the way this election was handled. And I think we improve over the next 2 years. I don't think when you're switching to a mail-in system, and they do it in Washington, they do it in Oregon, Colorado, have been doing it for years and doing it very well, and hardly anybody ever raises a complaint. But when you're doing this, I think we should keep partisan interest entirely outside the process. And you had partisan groups this time sending out absentee voter applications without much regard to respecting the integrity of the voter rolls or of the election. I had a friend lives out of state, had a Michigan absentee ballot mailed to her out of state address, hasn't voted here in 4 years. That kind of stuff, does raise.
Excuse me, Nolan, a ballot or an application?
An application. But still, it was sent by a partisan group. Why is a partisan group sending out these kind of applications? This should be wholly within the secretaries of state, Republican Secretary of State or a Democrat. The state should control the solicitation of absentee ballots, and they already control the mailing out, or the local clerks do. We should keep partisan interests as far away from the process as we can. We also have to give Detroit considerable help so that it gets its election night processes right. Once again, we had the absentee ballot books not matching the actual vote. It would have been very tough to recount the vote in Michigan without those. That's disfranchising voters, and it's disenfranchising Black voters. What system right in Detroit? We've got to do that. And again, I don't believe there was enough happened in Detroit to change the outcome of the election. I don't even think it was Wayne County where Donald Trump lost this election. I think overall in Wayne County, he got 20,000 fewer votes than he got last time around, but he got 50,000 fewer votes in Oakland County and almost 40,000 in Kent County. Those are the places he lost this election, not in Wayne County. And yet that's So we should, I mean, there are things we should have learned in this first go, assuming this is going to be the way we vote from here on out, because it's an awfully convenient, effective way to get high voter participation. And we should be encouraging it and working on it. But let's take what we learned this time and make sure we've got a foolproof system.
Okay. Thank you, Nolan. And we're still on the same topic regarding protecting the democratic process. There's a second series of questions from our committee. And Nolan, let's start with you. Some of the questions may be repeated what you've already covered, but I still want to cover these questions.
Yeah.
Nolan, what, in your opinion, would make the election process more fair and secure and eliminate the chaos of 2020? Specifically, do you think the United States should, one, institute national standards that apply to the states to provide uniformity in how elections are conducted? Two, replace the Electoral College, elect the president by national popular vote, use ranked choice voting, how to control faithless electors? Is there a way to reduce voter suppression and intimidation? Is there a better way than the current system to certify votes in Michigan? And
Hey, we better hold on. If I can remember all that.
I could repeat, I could have our repeat the questions if you want.
Yeah, let's take it one at a time if you can. The first one was
the uniformity in how elections are conducted. I believe the Constitution.
no, okay, no, I'm a federalist. I think the Constitution gives that duty to the state. I think the states handle it very well. And I think the next question was the Electoral College.
Yes.
I'm intrigued, given some limited support to this national popular vote initiative that would not change the Constitution, but it would still allow for the national vote to determine the actual outcome of the election. States would simply have to pass legislation that awarded their electoral votes based on the winner of the popular vote. Michigan passed that legislation years ago, and several states have passed. Once enough states make that move, then the popular vote will determine the outcome of the election, but you will still have local control of elections, and it won't be one massive federal vote. And I think having that local control of elections, I think it does help in voter confidence and maintaining integrity. I would hate to try to ferret out irregularities in a massive federal vote that all went into one pot. I think the states have done a good job. I would disagree that this was a chaotic election. I think we did remarkably well, given look at the voter turnout, given that we're in the midst of a pandemic where people had to disrupt their normal means of participating in the vote, couldn't leave their house and go to their precincts. I think we did awfully well. The chaos is all post-election by a president who's, as I think everybody could have expected, unwilling to concede, that he lost the election. And this will go on for a few more weeks, but it won't go on forever. And so, did I miss what was after that?
And let me go to Brian for this, because that was such a long question. Brian, if you had any comments on that long question, or factors such as controlling faithless electors, using things like ranked choice voting, how to suppress voter suppression and intimidation. Did you have any comments on what Nolan said, or any of those other aspects to the question?
Steve, my thinking is shifted a little bit about this. On election night, I was pretty frustrated watching all these different systems of tabulating votes mesh with one another. The most obvious and striking one was the difference between states who count their absentee votes first and states that count them last. And so as a result, we had people all over thinking the Democrats were within striking distance of taking Ohio and Texas all night because they count their absentee votes first. And that proved to be sheer fantasy. And then we had the reverse phenomena in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, where Republicans were in the lead early on and watched it slip away as they counted absentee ballots. And after that night, I was thinking, this is insanity. This is 2020. We ought to have uniform rules for counting this. So, to know that votes are counted the same way in all 50 states. And then, as I watched the process unfold afterwards, I came to the reluctant conclusion that there's a lot of strength in the multiplicity of ways states go about this and the idiosyncrasies of each state. One of the reasons I have confidence in the process overall is because the possibility that somebody could effectively manipulate all of those 50 idiosyncratic processes, or even the ones in the 6 or 7 swing states, is so remote. And you see, the dynamic that unfolded in Georgia, where the Republican Secretary of State, Republican governor are at loggerheads. And, who knew that the Secretary of State and the governor of Georgia didn't like each other, and that would, in a weird way, reinforce voter confidence that the process there was fair in the long run. I do think that all states ought to be given the option to start processing absentee ballots earlier. I don't agree that the counting process was chaotic in Detroit, but I think it was what human error took place there was magnified by the fact that they couldn't start counting absentee ballots until the morning of the election, and they were under tremendous pressure to do it. And it's like any other work, when you have people working long hours without rest, under time pressure, more mistakes get made than when it proceeds in a more methodical way. So that's one thing I'd change universally.
Brian, if I can ask a follow-up of the future of the two-party system. As long as we have electoral college, it's winner take all, and having to get 200 and the proper amount of votes, 269. You look at the Democratic Party, you look at the Republicans, their coalitions that sometimes seem very strained. What do you see as the future of the two-party system?
Well, there's the future of the two-party system and the future of the Electoral College, which are slightly different things. Most people don't understand how very close we came to abolishing the Electoral College in at the end of the 60s, 1970. But right now, I think, Republicans recognize that if that were to happen, they might never win a presidential election again. And until that dynamic changes, I don't think there'll be any support for a constitutional amendment. I agree with Nolan that the compact in which a majority of states or states representing a majority of electoral votes agree to award their votes to the winner of the popular vote would be a step in the right direction. I don't believe, Nolan, that Michigan has joined that compact yet.
They passed it years ago, but they haven't, it's expired. They haven't passed it, but they did pass it 10, 15 years ago when it first came up. Yeah, so, it's a way to do it. And it's funny, that movement, even though it's been Republicans who've benefited from the Electoral College not matching the popular vote, it's conservatives and Republicans pushing this national popular vote movement. Saul Anusas has been the former Republican Party chair in Michigan, has been deeply involved in it because they believe their vote would increase in places like California and New York, where voters know there is no hope of the state going Republican, and their votes basically don't count. And so Republicans believe their votes nationwide would increase. And more importantly, they believe the candidates then would have reason to go to places like California, New York, and seriously campaign rather than just pass through and do a little housekeeping. So they would force these candidates to campaign in every state because every vote in every state would be important. And it's not like that now. You saw this time. There's 6, 7 states that get 80, 90% of the campaign attention and the campaign spending. And we don't realize that because we live in Michigan and we see campaign, these candidates nonstop. And Oklahoma, where they're pretty sure it's going to be a Republican vote, they don't get as much attention. They don't see the candidates.
Thank you, Nolan. Let's move to our second topic, the U.S. position in the world, foreign affairs. Nolan, if we can start with you, what are your thoughts about whether the United States can restore trust with allies and reestablish its leadership role in the world? And let's
So
start.
that is, I believe they've lost, and I don't necessarily think they have. Remember, Donald Trump succeeded a president whose operating strategy was lead from behind. I think Donald Trump's been up and down, hit and miss on foreign policy. I think he started a good process with North Korea, then sort of lost interest with it. And it was important to engage North Korea. I think his approach to Israel and the Middle East and Iran have produced results we haven't seen in an awfully long time. I would hope Joe Biden, as Thomas Friedman wrote, it's not 5 years ago, and building this coalition centered around Israel, if you will, to counter the power of Iran is much, much better than a policy of Eastern Europe. I was in Eastern Europe a couple of years ago. They love Donald Trump there. Now there's places that the NATO countries have, and the European countries have more negative view of the United States. But I don't think there's any question that we remain the leader in the world, and I don't think this is as large as it was played out to be.
Thank you. And Brian, your comments on the same question of the United States, our role in the world, whether we've lost prestige, and if we have, can we regain that trust?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I don't know whether it's a problem unique to me, but I'm losing about half of Nolan's audio. So
That's about all you need.
well,
I apologize. I may be having internet connections. I'll try to talk a little slower, but I'm having bad connections.
well, if I repeat points Nolan has already made, I apologize in advance. I think we're in a very different position than the one we'd be in if Donald Trump had won re-election. Because I think there may be some Eastern European countries where Donald Trump is popular, but I think most of the Western world, and particularly most of America's allies in the Western world, have been completely traumatized by the last 4 years. And the fact that he was defeated in his bid for a second term, which doesn't normally happen to presidents, makes it easier for that audience to understand 2016 as an anomaly and a deviation from, a fairly long period of bipartisan consensus in things like NATO and that more trade is better than less trade. So I'm optimistic about that, but I disagree with Nolan that no damage has been done to our standing. I think there has been damage strategically and economically, and that our reluctance, for instance, to set the parameters of trade in Asia has allowed China to fill that vacuum. And that will be a challenge for the incoming administration.
And if I can ask a follow-up question, and let's start with.
Let me add to that, Stephen, if I
Of
can.
course, of course.
You know, on trade with China, I agree. I think that was disaster. The TPP was disastrous. But I remember being at the Democratic Convention 4 years ago, and no TPP was there, or Trans-Pacific Partnership. No TPP was there on their buttons too. Neither party was going to join that alliance, and I filled the void. And it was a huge, huge mistake, and something a Republican administration should have never allowed to happen.
And let me do a follow-up question regarding reassuring other nations that our words, that our agreements are going to last, that our treaties, agreements, and part of this when I'm talking about the executive agreements, there's, whether it was Obama who's criticized or Trump, and how do we convince other countries that when the United States enters agreement that their word is going to be good and it's going to last past the administration? Nolan, go first.
First thing you've got to do is the treaty protocols. All treaties should be ratified by the Senate. They shouldn't be done by executive orders because, and I think that's true of most policy, but particularly with freedom, with treaties and agreements with other nations. If they're not ratified, if they're done simply by presidential fiat, they can be undone. So I think the first commitment we should make is that all treaties, all foreign agreements by the Senate.
Okay, and so no executive agreements for international affairs is basically what you're saying.
Not for treaties, not for anything that passes as a treaty.
Sure, no, I understand, and distinguishing treaties from executive agreements. And Brian, did you want to comment on that as well?
Well, I just say we're looking at a Senate that may be divided evenly between Republicans and Democrats, and so Senate ratification is not necessarily a guarantee of consistency from one term to the next. I think every other country in the world understands how closely divided the United States is, how polarized it is, and it's just a fact of life that there's going to be no long-term certainty going forward. That's not how democracy works in a pluralistic and polarized place like this one.
And Nolan, before we move to the next topic, Nolan, did you want to make a follow-up comment on the
I would
point?
just say, I mean, and it is true. It's true at both the state level and at the federal level, where if you have a legislature controlled by one party or even one house by one party, another, it's going to be hard to get an agenda through. It's going to be hard to get things done. But the founders designed this system so that it wouldn't be easy changes. It's designed to force the parties to reach a consensus. And do that now. But I think that's where the people step in. If your politicians won't work together, change the two-party system earlier. And I think two parties stay, but it doesn't have to be these two parties. And we've let these two parties enjoy this duopoly for too long. And I think as voters, we should start entertaining alternatives.
Okay, thank you, Nolan. Let's move to our next topic, the economy and COVID. And let's start with Brian. Sort of a long question. Women make up the majority of essential workers in areas such as senior housing staff, home care workers, and traditionally minimum wage jobs such as grocery store workers. They are disproportionately, they have to leave their jobs to be home to care for children and elderly parents during this pandemic. Do you think this will be a long-term setback in gender equity issues for work-related issues such as corporate promotions, pay equity, family leave, et cetera? What about the loss for their families and the loss of their spending in the economy? And let's go to Brian.
Well, as a matter, there's there's no question that women have and will continue to bear disproportionately the economic brunt of the pandemic and its attendant economic crises for all the reasons you mentioned. But if you're asking me, do I think that will take the steam out of efforts to achieve more gender parity economically and legally and politically, I think just the opposite. Obviously, women in both parties did very well, both in 2018 and again in this election. And I think the differences, the discrepancies you mentioned have been brought into sharper relief, and there are more people, more elected leaders in positions of power to do something about it. So I think in the short run, it's going to be very bad for women, but in the long run, it might actually accelerate some of the changes that were taking place.
Thank you. And Brian, Nolan, your comments on that?
Yeah, I think this pandemic has had some interesting impacts, including the ones you mentioned. And women have been put in a very difficult position. In particular, I see it in my own family. My two daughters work in important jobs. My daughter-in-law works in an important job, and they all have children at home. And I think we're seeing sort of a throwback to a different era, or the practices, because the extended families, the grandparents are now much more engaged in the child rearing and the child caring. For the COVID, I've been over this week to sit with my grandson. I'm doing my work, he's doing his. Other grandparents come in and out. Most all my friends my age have the same experience. They have to pitch in. They have to, help out their sisters and brothers more, working together much more. And so, it has been, that's been a very interesting phenomenon. I don't think we've explored fully.
Nolan, if I could do a follow-up on the economy, that that Wall Street is improving, but then we look at Main Street, where it seems that Main Street is not. What are the implications for small businesses that are closing due to COVID-19 and individuals losing unemployment or compensation when federal relief ends?
Well, it's terrible. I mean, we're going to see, particularly in the hospitality industry, we're going to see a quarter million hospitality workers off the job during the holidays, maybe up to a fourth of or 25% of our restaurants, bars shutting down. Those are all small jobs. I think, beyond that impact, I mean, talks about millions of children around the world falling back into poverty, tens of millions of people starving because of the economic shutdowns. We had been making steady progress over the last few years. That's taken a sudden dive over the past year. On the other hand, when we reopened the economy, we came roaring back. What do we have? 31% growth, GDP growth in the third quarter. That's amazing. I think once the vaccine is here and we can end these, have helped that much, if at all. But once we can comfortably end them, I think there'll be a lot of pent up demand in this economy. It's not going to do much for the people who have lost their businesses, lost their homes, lost their jobs during this.
And you said end these and then it cut out. And I know you made an important point right there. I wanted to give a chance.
Okay, set me up a little.
You said we had to end these and then it cut out for a little bit.
I think the shutdowns,
And the shutdowns is what you said.
Get this economy open safely. I have been talking to restaurant owners all week about the put in place to safeguard their restaurants their ventilation systems, the protocol, and I think they were unfairly shut down a second time, shut down without any evidence that the shutdown would work and or would help improve the numbers. And they're paying a horrible price. So
Okay.
and I think a lot of them aren't going to be around. It's going to have a this is going to have a real impact on the city of Detroit. We should talk about that a little bit. Both Brian and I work downtown and have for a long time. And we go down there. I know we were both down there the other day. Looks like 1999 on the streets, man. There's nobody down there. And you wonder what the dynamic is going to be, city's comeback and downtown's comeback when this is done. Will people return to office buildings? Will these restaurants and bars be filled with new owners or perhaps even the old owners who have recovered? Those are all big questions for the city.
Okay, thank you. And we'll definitely make sure we come back to Michigan and Detroit. Brian, if I can bounce back to you with the same question regarding Wall Street versus Main Street and your observations of how each are doing.
Well, I don't agree. I don't disagree with anything Nolan said about the state of things right now for small businesses in general and restaurants and hotels. I think it would be absolute folly to reopen them at this point. And I disagree. I think there's abundant evidence that it continues to be one of the riskiest things you do to eat in a restaurant with other people, even when they've taken precautions, even when the tables are separated. It seems to me so obvious that the challenge is, just as it is for all the rest of us, but much more acutely for restaurants, is getting to warm weather, getting to spring, getting to warm weather where you can dine outside, getting to a place where vaccination is common. And it just seems so clear to me that the short-term cost of propping these businesses up with taxpayer dollars, with borrowed money over the next 3 months will pay dividends for decades if we can do that. But if we do that and 500,000 people die, I don't think that's a fair trade-off.
Thank you. Let's move to our next topic, number 4, the role of the media. And Brian, let's start with you. Whether or not, I guess this makes an assumption, but the question is, will the media be able to regain public trust from those who believe reporting is fake or distorted? And what is your paper doing, or each of your papers, working through the reality distortion, misinformation, disinformation about the election, and what can be done? And I guess we should distinguish print media, radio, what's on the internet, but what do you see as the role of the media and how it's perceived now than it was a generation ago?
It's obviously worse. I'm sure that Nolan and his colleagues have spent as much time over the last year as I have grappling with that problem specifically. We talk about it every day, trust problem, trust in our institutions themselves and in the quality of the information we distribute. We took unprecedented steps this year to fight disinformation and misinformation. We hired a team of people. They're mostly half my age. They have skills, technical skills and social media savvy that Nolan and I and all the other editorial page editors in the world couldn't begin to match. And they they not only debunked bad information, they were able to trace it to its source. They were able to find people who didn't want to be found and surface their funding and their motives. And we did a pretty good job at that, but it was a fire hose of disinformation. And I'd be lying if I said I thought we had a tremendous impact or that we changed the way a substantial number of doubters think about the mainstream media.
Okay, thank you. And Nolan, did you want to comment on the same question?
I think it's a major issue. And, you know, newspapers, people in this profession tend to blame their readers because they don't trust us. Well, there's only something, I just looked it up. It's only 40% of the people have fair or a great deal of trust in Michigan, or in the media. 60% have little or no trust in the media. That's a significant number. And you can't blame that on your customers. You can't blame that on your readers and on your listeners. That's things we've done in large part to erode trust. And I think over the last 4 years, we got so caught up in this war with Donald Trump and took his bait at every turn that they abandoned some of their basic principles. I don't think anybody could look at newspapers and listen to broadcasts today and compare it to 10 years ago and say the level of objectivity is the same. Reading news stories from reputable sources, from long established and trusted, should have been trusted wire services that include a fair dose of opinion in every. He decided somewhere over the early course of the Trump presidency that it was our responsibility to add context to our reporting. And that's well and good, but a lot of outlets and a lot of reporters, a lot of broadcasters can't distinguish context from commentary. And we get calls, I get calls every day about this. I'm tired of reading your opinion in news stories. I'm tired of those AP. And I read those stories and I think the same thing, whether it's slanted right or slanted left. It chills me to see that much commentary, that much opinion in news stories. And I think we were trusted for a very long time because we adhered to a very specific set of professional standards that we wholly today. And I think we got to do that if we expect to regain the people's trust. And it's important we do so. It's important that the major outlets, mainstream media is trusted, because there's so many untrustworthy and shady outfits out there pretending to be media outlets that you can't trust and are spreading disinformation. It's important they would trust the Detroit News, the Detroit Free Press, the AP, whatever. We have to have a hierarchy of credibility in the media because there's so many bottom feeders out there just fueling the division in this country.
You know, I know we could talk about the media for a long time, but I want to make sure we get back to Nolan. You mentioned before, you talked about Detroit, and if we can talk our other main topic, the implications of the election for Michigan. Michigan has been spotlighted in the news again and again. That woman from Michigan, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, the governor, a swing state. Can you talk about Michigan, Detroit, and even how some of the demographics have changed, where Oakland County is now blue, Macomb, I don't know if it's red or purple. You look at Kent County, and if you could talk about the elections in Michigan and how Michigan is different now.
I think Michigan is itself as a true swing state, even in federal elections, and that wasn't true for a long time. We know we went 20 some years, 25, 24 years, where we didn't elect anything but Democrats in federal elections, or at least for the presidency. But has it always been a back and forth state since the 60s? Every time we've changed governors at the end of a term, at the end of their legal terms, we've changed parties. We've gone Republican to Democrat, back to Republican, back to Democrat. Each change up since the 1960s, since Bill Milliken. And so, you know, Michigan has always been not a state you can put in any with any confidence in either category. So I think politically, not much changes in Michigan with this election. Legislature remains in Republican hands. Obviously, the governor's office remains in Democratic hands. They'll continue to, you know, fight and bicker and name call and what have you until it becomes in their both in best interest to sit down, work together, which they could do. I think the real change in Michigan comes in 2022 after we've redrawn districts, both for Congress and for the State House and Senate. Depending on how that process unfolds, that could have a real impact or will have a real impact.
And Brian, if you can talk about Michigan and specifically just some of the changing demographics within the state. I mentioned that before. Until a couple elections ago, Oakland County was solidly Republican. Now it's solidly blue, where the Democrats were counting on Oakland County having a big turnout. You look at Macomb County, it's always been countywide been Republican. Now I think you had 4 of the 5 county seats are Republican. So Brian, if we could just, you comment about the changing demographics within the state of these different sub jurisdictions.
Well, I think both the phenomena you mentioned are probably irreversible for the next several election cycles, at least. Oakland is going to be Democratic for a while. And I think one of the striking things about this election is the Republicans in Oakland couldn't get their strongest candidates to even take a stab at countywide office or even the congressional seats this year because they read and they follow demographic trends. Macomb is more interesting. It's you call it purple, but essentially what's happening is that the northern part of Macomb is growing a great deal faster than the southern part, and that's all to the Republicans' advantage there. So I see that trend is continuing. We're so used to talking about the African American vote and the Detroit vote almost interchangeably, but that's less and less true. The African American vote now it's Redford, it's Southfield, it's Warren, a lot of close-in suburbs in all 3 counties, and I haven't done a deep enough dive into the 2020 results, but I'll be interested to see what the African American vote looks like when you bring in all of the suburban African American voters now. 2022 is going to be so interesting, and nobody has any idea what's going to happen because we've never carved the state up this way before. And I mean, it's widely assumed that because the state has been gerrymandered so profoundly to Republican advantage that any change is going to redound to the Democrats' advantage. But I don't think that's guaranteed. It's very possible we'll lose a congressional seat in Michigan that will have 13 going forward instead of 14. And I'm not at all confident that that loss won't come from the Democratic column or that Haley Stevens and Andy Levin and Alyssa Slotkin will all be secure in their seats in a dramatically reconfigured state. So I think between the fact that polling has become so unreliable for all kinds of reasons, and the fact that we're about to have an election on a game board nobody's ever imagined before, I think in many ways 2022 is going to be more interesting than this year.
Before we move to questions and answers from the audience, Noel, did you have any other comments on the demographics in Michigan, or are we ready to move to questions and answers from the audience?
Yeah, we can, nothing like, we have everybody squawking in 12 and, favor Republicans, particularly in the congressional districts. But what happened by the 10 years, you got a dead even 7-7 congressional delegation, and you've got, smaller majorities in the state house. Things change in Michigan so fast. Nothing's permanent. I mean, nothing lasts.
Okay. Well, thank you. I know we have Lynn, some of our other committee members are going to take over this point to have some questions and answers from the audience. I still have several others, but I want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. So Lynn, did you want to cut in right now and start with the questions?
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, so there have been numerous ones that have come in, and if you'd like to add more, please do. So this question can go to either of you, and you both can respond. Do you think the legislature will allow absentee ballots to be processed sooner in future elections? I know in this election, they changed it to processing starting on Monday, but if I'm correct, it was only for this election.
Well, that's not a decision without possible consequences. And, it's more important. I mean, we tend to think of the election now as a TV show, and we got to know the results at 11 o'clock, or, the most the integrity and accuracy of the vote and the count. And if the results don't come in till 11 o'clock the next night or 2 nights later, that's okay. It's not a TV show. And there are some serious things to consider before you say, let's start counting these votes days ahead of election day. Can the state assure that the count as it's tallied remains absolutely confidential? Because if it leaks out, oh, the absentee ballots are favoring this candidate or that candidate, it could have a great impact on the outcome of the election of the candidate. So you have to make sure you can protect the security that 100% yet in Michigan. Can you do some things like we did this time? They allowed for some opening of the ballots. Yeah, sure. You can do that. But I think each thing you change has to be weighed against the risk to the security and accuracy of the vote count.
Brian, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, a couple of things. Nolan is right that it shouldn't matter so much when we find out the result as that the result is accurate. In this election, that was complicated by the fact that you had an enormous campaign led by the President of the United States suggesting that any vote that wasn't tabulated on election night was illegitimate. And that was a big, big problem. I think the next election conducted with a large absentee participation rate will be a lot less jarring than this one was, simply because people will have been through it before, and they'll understand that, in states that count, large states that count absentee votes last are going to report late, and that there's nothing sinister about it. It's math thing. I, I think the security risks associated with beginning to process ballots early are greatly overstated. And the reason I think that is because Republican and Democratic election clerks across the state agree with that. Just as on election day, they're counting ballots all day as you feed them into the reader. Your ballot is being counted, but they're not tabulated until 8 o'clock when somebody presses a button and the machine spits out the results. And there's no reason why that system can't be adopted for absentee ballot counting as well.
Thank you. Brian, can you explain why the Republicans would not win another presidential election if the Electoral College were abolished? Although I think Nolan alluded to that, but the person asked you. Brian.
Okay. Well, because the Electoral College, you know, it was designed to put less populous states at less on an even playing field with more populous states. So it tends to, you know, your vote means more in electoral terms in Montana than it does in California. And if you erase that differential and make it a straight popular vote thing, at least, because Nolan made a good point, that the merely understanding that Republican votes will count more in California and Democratic votes will count more in Texas might change the number of people who participate. But, you know, if the participation remains pretty steady, Democrats would have an advantage in most elections, as they did in 2016 when Donald Trump won the Electoral College.
Thank you. In the wake of the last 4 years, say with the increasing polarization of the political scene, how would you recommend that we return to more civility in the political class, in the media, etc.? Open to either or both of you.
I think we should start with ourselves and have more civility in our own interactions. I'm sure Brian has the same experience every day that I do in terms of the people who write in or call him or email him and telling him how very much he hates him because of the way the way he thinks politically and the way he writes his political views, his ideology. I had one Sunday morning, you effing imbecile, blank and blank blank. I'm like, I hate you. And I'm like, I don't recall meeting you, but you hate me because of what I write. And it's not just people in public places like Brian and I who get that. Increasingly, anyone we meet who we disagree with, we assign qualities to. Person just doesn't simply disagree with us based on their own experiences and values. They disagree with us because they're stupid or evil or want to destroy the country. And we get more and more of that, fueled by cable TV, fueled by social media. It's not just the politicians that are divided and fighting in America. And I think we need to take a step back and recognize that it's healthy, which people have different views and dissent is tolerated and not punished. And, I think that's the way we've always thrived. We've been here before where people, have been angry and divided and what have you. We got through it. We can get through it this time, but it's got to start with us. We got to start showing more civility in our personal interactions.
Here's an interesting question. Should an income tax surcharge with no deductions be used so those profiting from the virus, like Amazon, contribute to saving the victim businesses?
Well, no, not my view. I mean, I assume Amazon is going to pay taxes on its profits, or at least the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people they now employ. I don't think we ever want to discourage innovation and even creative opportunism, if you will. What would we have done during this pandemic without Amazon? I mean, who would have thought a truck would come up to your door to deliver a $2 light bulb or mask or whatever? I mean, it's been a brilliant company, and they should be rewarded with that brilliance. We've got to make sure they're in place. But saying, well, gosh, you benefited from this pandemic, so we're going to tax you. How do you separate the businesses that have and the businesses that haven't, up and down the scale? One thing Amazon has done during this pandemic is greatly expanded its workforce. What more better could it do for the economy than put people to work?
Lynn, I would say I don't think there should be a special income tax surcharge on particular actors in the system. I do think that we're going to have to find a way to share the economic burden of this pandemic more equitably than the randomness of the market has distributed. A restaurant worker wrote me today and said, how is it fair that you go to work every day and you continue to get a paycheck and health insurance, but I can't? And I said, there's nothing fair about that. But it is a fact that I'm able to do my job from home with minimum exposure and risk to other people, and you're not. And there's nothing fair about it. And I think I should share that restaurant worker's burden. I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us how we're all connected to each other. And, the pain of that unemployed worker and people like him is going to fall on us one way or the other. If there are mass evictions, if the food insecurity cropping up in big cities is getting pretty scary. If you watch people get in line for grocery cards at 2 hours before the sun rises, and by the time they get to the front of the line, there are no more grocery cards yet. That's how desperate they are, and that's how limited the supply is. We're going to have to find a way, and it's probably going to be via taxation to share that burden more equitably.
Lynn, if I could add to the question, I mean, there's absolutely no way the government can replace the private economy in terms of maintaining payrolls, benefits, et cetera. I'll say what I said earlier. The best way to help these people is to reopen the economy in a safe way. And, if we've got the auto plants operating safely, I think we can operate business, restaurants and other places safely, or as safe as possible. We got people dying every day because of these shutdowns, not of COVID. Suicide rate is going through the roof. We got to get people back to work, this economy open, concentrate on protecting the vulnerable. 40% of the deaths in this recent surge nationwide have been in nursing homes. Those people aren't going to restaurants. Protect the people who are most vulnerable and open up for the rest of the folks and get this economy going again.
Thank you both for your comments. Are your newspapers reevaluating the timing of their stated support for candidates and policies now that mail-in ballots are sent in so early? So will we see endorsements earlier?
I'm sure we will. I mean, I didn't keep careful track of when the Detroit News's endorsements came out, but I was painfully aware that people were voting before our endorsements came out. And, you know, like lots of other institutions, we weren't as nimble as I would have liked in reacting to that. But the voting process, I don't know that we'll see quite as large a proportion of people voting absentee 2 or 4 years from now as we did this year. But it's obviously changed, and the voting process is going to unfold earlier and over a longer period of time, and it would be unforgivable for us not to recognize that and adjust.
I mean, there's some practical obstacles of that. We'd like to be done with our endorsements by the time the absentee voting kicks in, but we don't know the nominees for most of the races until that first Tuesday in August. And for some of the statewide races and court races, we don't know until the county conventions later in August. Given the new reality of our staffing levels, trying to get all the races we do done in a careful manner, candidates interviewed, records checked, and get all of the endorsements done by that first or second week in October is probably not going to happen. But I still think vast majority of people vote either by mail or in person in those last 2 weeks of the election. We try to get ours done at least 3 weeks out. I don't anticipate us being able to improve that much unless we went to a spring primary, which I wouldn't mind.
Thank you both. Okay, one last question. And thank you to all of you who have submitted questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but we appreciate your input. What is your opinion regarding the use of presidential pardons?
Depends how they're used. I mean, I'm a big supporter of executive pardons. I wish Rick Snyder would have used his more aggressively going out of office. We got too many people locked up in this country for too long, and too many people are locked up who have already been rehabilitated, already have redeemed themselves, and their time in prison is serving no other purpose than, or no purpose in terms of protecting society. There's no societal benefit to keeping them locked up. There's no service to justice in keeping them locked up. I would like to see the governor, for example, do monthly pardons, a monthly review of the prison population with the goal of getting everybody out who no longer presents a danger to society and have been adequately punished, if that's what we want to accomplish. So presidential pardons, I'm all for. I supported the pardon of Michael Flynn. I thought he was the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt that was designed to undermine the new administration. But beyond that, I hope Trump sits down with, who was it that recommended the pardon of the woman last summer, the Kardashian. I hope he sits down with, I hope she's got a big long list that she brings to him to get everyday Americans out of prison who should no longer be there. I believe we can reduce our prison prison population by 40% or more without impacting public safety. And one of the most effective means to do that is executive pardons and commutations.
I don't disagree about the worthiness of the institution, or that it should be used more and not less often than it's used now by presidents and governors. And it's unfortunate that pardons are so unpopular that governors and presidents usually wait until their last days in office to issue them. I do think we need to do something about pardons that are essentially self-dealing. It's obviously it can be used as a form of currency, and if a president uses the pardon power to facilitate illegal activity with the promise that the people who perpetrate it won't suffer the consequences, then that's an abuse that has to be addressed. I don't believe, for instance, that a president has the power to pardon himself. And if a court rules otherwise, I think we'd want to, address that legislatively or constitutionally.
Thank you both. Nolan, did you want to say something?
No,
Okay. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve at this point. Thank you both.
thanks, Lynn. Appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you. And let's start with Brian. We covered so many topics. Are there any final comments that you wish to make? In the Nolan, we'll let you wrap up and have the last word. Brian, we covered a broad range of topics. Any other major things on your mind right now that you wish to discuss?
Steve, if you'll indulge me, I just have a question. How does a guy become a judge of AP American history exams? What, do you have to become a Jeopardy champion first, or?
You know, I got lucky. I have a master's in U.S. history, and I was teaching it, and I applied. I've done it the last 3 years. It's incredible. I'm certain they're looking for more people with your knowledge. That would be wonderful.
And I bet you make a ton of money at it too.
No, unfortunately, no. But it is fun, and I definitely enjoyed it. I love American history.
Good for you.
So thank you. But I have to throw it back to you, though. I was supposed to be the one asking the question, not you. Although I haven't been able to cross-examine. As a lawyer, it kind of was difficult. But Brian, did you have any wrap-up questions that you'd like?
I don't think so. We've been inundated with commentary and analysis of this election, and as I said, I'm really looking forward to 2022 and how interesting that's going to be with the game board entirely thrown up in the air.
Sure. Nolan, did you have any final comments that you wanted to make on any of the topics that we discussed?
I'd just say overall, like what I said in the beginning, the system worked. It worked once again. We need changes in a lot of areas in America to our fundamental systems and the foundations of this democracy that have served us so well for so long. I think they're still sound, and we should be very cautious in making wholesale changes to them.
That's an optimistic interpretation, a good place to stop. I know that we want to go back to the co-chairs for some final comments, but thank you both to Brian and Nolan. It was an honor to be here to ask both of you questions and to participate. Marilyn, I think you had some questions or comments? And there you are.
There I am. Well, I think Lynn has something she wants to share on the screen. Lynn, are you ready? There we go. I'm on the wrong page. We would also like to thank all of our panelists for sharing their reflections and views today. We'd like to thank Steve as well for your participation in moderating this webinar. We appreciate that you all took time to join us this evening. A job well done. Lynn and I would also like to thank the members of the NCJW Michigan 2020 Election Committee, the Programming Subcommittee, and the office staff for assistance in planning this program. Visit our website or contact us for information about NCJW Michigan and our election resources and recorded webinars. You will receive an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of this webinar. Thank you for joining us this evening. This concludes our webinar. Please stay well and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.